All right, Katie, why don't we start in the back of the room with Michael?
Hello. So, does anyone wonder exactly why Elmwood Avenue is the center of redevelopment in the city of Buffalo and the highest per capita income zone in the city of Buffalo? It relates to the first or second slide that was presented today. It's a central place. So my question is, how do we expand that central place not only within the city street grid, as we've discussed, those solutions are already in place, we know that, they're traditional solutions, but how do we reestablish the central place in the mind of the people? These ideas go back to von Thunen, a German geographer in the 18th century.
Well, we could do an entire graduate course on that question. But the city as a whole is a place. The downtown's a place. There's places within the place that they all need to be connected. And I think where your highways come in is they sever what were relationships, and we need to recreate those relationships that were severed. The streets themselves were public, they're public places to begin with. We need to make them public. We need to make them multimodal, complete streets. We need to make them accessible, not just along the street, but across them as well. And reclaim all of these places and addresses. The streets that are out there now, they weren't concerned about the fabric. And if we make the streets support the fabric will come back, and you'll see a lot of we saw boarded up homes today on our tour. You'll see those homes come back to life. You'll see neighborhoods that are now cut off being able to get places. You'll see a lot of the businesses that went out of business will come back, and you'll see a lot of the places that used to be vibrant come back. And you can create more places if you want, depending on your planning. But the city is a series of lots of little places that are connected by other public infrastructure.
Okay. Up in the front here.
My name is Marianne Miles. I'm a retired U.S. ambassador. I currently live in North Buffalo. My question to you is about alternatives. You showed a picture of the Champs-Élysées in Paris, and the reason it does not need to be a highway is because underneath the Champs-Élysées is a very extensive, very efficient metro system. You showed a picture from Korea, where also there is very highly developed public transportation. Buffalo does not have a highly developed public transportation system, certainly not an underground. So traffic evaporation doesn't happen because people no longer need to come in from other parts of the city or from suburbia or from rural areas. Traffic evaporation happens because people have an alternative. What is the alternative that you're envisioning for Buffalo?
Wow, good question. I'm on the spot, aren't I? In West Palm Beach, for example, we had no public transit, and we had very little housing, actually. And so we were busily narrowing our arterials and building density. And what happened there? So what happens is trip lengths shorten. You don't have to replace the same trip with a long transit trip. Behaviors change, markets change. When we sped up our roads and created the highway dependencies that we have today, you know, it created a whole market for big boxes. Like you could build a big box out in the suburbs at the interchange. The truck would come in, dump the pallets off, and people would drive long distances on publicly subsidized distribution systems to pick up the stuff, and you get 25 cents off your peanut butter, and you know that's what was going on. And so what will happen is, for example, in West Palm Beach, as we started reducing the car carrying capacity of our network, we did create more access. What cities need is access. And what happened was markets changed, and so food started becoming available in our downtown because there was a market now for entrepreneurs instead of national chains. A grocery store opened up so people could find what they need going by. So we have to get past these sort of simplistic ideas of, well, they're going to switch from cars to transit. That's not how cities work when you do this sort of thing. They become better cities. Furthermore, there's still more car trips happening on the Champs-Élysées than on the highway in Dallas. They're just shorter trips because of their land uses. So don't fall for these sort of well-articulated, by the way, questions that don't actually understand how real cities work. Otherwise, the West Palm would have failed. We would have had Carmageddon, just like the model said. What happened in San Francisco? Like, right away, people started adapting. There wasn't Carmageddon even right after the earthquake. So what happened there? Even in Atlanta, when they had the fire just recently and the big interstate was out of service, if you looked at the congestion maps, they were even less afterwards. So what happens in these situations? People adapt. In Seattle, when I-5 had to get closed down for an emergency repair, they only have 2 big highways, north-south. So one of them gets closed down. They didn't have time to set up buses and everything else to accommodate the people. The headline in the paper next day was something like, nothing happened. People adapt, and so have some faith in the people. Your people adapted to the highway, they will adapt back. Half your population or more left. As you make your city nicer, people will move back, just like in West Palm Beach, just like it's happening in Detroit, just like it's happening in lots of other places. Copenhagen is a great example. They were going very car dependent, but they did change their transit, their parking, all sorts of things, and now have a really nice city. Now, Buffalo had an incredible transit system before it was abandoned for what we're talking about now. So instead of investing in, I should say spending, it's not investing, spending on highways, invest in transit, and you'll get these outcomes again. So it's you get what you buy, and if you buy transit and walking and stuff, that's what you're going to get. And if you perpetuate this sort of long distance type thinking, that's what you're going to get. Now, keep in mind, we're not saying don't do other things. Like there's a lot of efforts around the country to change the suburbs, to make them more independent, to balance jobs and housing and these sorts of things, and give them options that concentrate trips so that transit's effective. Like we just, oh my gosh, it's probably 15 years ago, we did part of Charlotte's plans along their arterials, which go out into the suburbs. And we built stations, like on all 5 arterials, there's 12 stations. And they're like little downtowns where the people who live in the suburbs can get what they need close at hand. And then for the long haul, they can go to the transit station and come in town. So there are solutions for the suburbs. We're not saying that you do this independent and ignore others. There's a term for this, when you do all these things parallel that all contribute to a common vision, and we call it planning. And you just got to plan and think about where you want it to go and align your resources accordingly.
I just want to expand on this. Part of the problem that we've had with...
Well, for everybody also in the audience, and can everyone introduce themselves before they start speaking? You got to do it one time.
I'll do it one time. Michael DeLuca with the Parkside Community Association. Part of the problem we've had with this plan has always been that it's not a holistic look. So even when it was the 190 to 33, it was very isolated for being the roadway and never the affected communities. Not even, to Amherst Street to Hurdle, which is very close on the north side, or south side going to Delvin even. I mean, it was very isolated look. So we've been arguing that a whole community look at the roadway system needs to be done to integrate it. A lot of times we see around the city there's roadway projects that change the infrastructure and the traffic patterns, but they're not holistically looked at. So if you change one road, but you don't think about the adjacent roads, be it the timing or the street infrastructure that's there, you have a ripple effect. And that's the bit of the problems we've noticed locally, but the DOT from day one didn't have any interest in looking at this as a planning effort. They looked at it as a roadway effort. We're going to go fast, we're going to get through it, and we're going to keep the level of service, and that's part of the purpose of needs statement. So, I mean, until part of the focus that we've had is you need to look at everything, and until you look at everything, this is not a good plan that will have a positive effect on the community.
Yep. Oh, go ahead, Justin.
Sorry, Justin Booth, director at Go Bike Buffalo. How many of you walked here this evening? Just a quick raise of hands. Walk. Did you walk here this evening? All right, a couple. How many of you rode your bike here this evening? All right, a couple. How many of you took transit here this evening? Okay, a couple. How many of you drove here this evening? Right? How many of you would have chose a different mode if it was easy for you to do so? Right? And so, I mean, I ride my bike, and people look at me silly, like I ride my bike in the wintertime to get to different places. For those of you who have walked, was your walk easy because the sidewalks were clear of snow? You know, have we made safe access on our streets for bicycles? We've made a choice over the last, decades to choose car travel and value car travel more than any other mode of transportation. And so, the examples that Ian talked about, the conversations we've been having at the Department of Transportation, it's a consistent story that we've been telling. How do we want to build our city into the future? We're looking at downtown Buffalo. Downtown's land use is roughly about 52% utilization for parking. Our land use downtown is for parking cars, and we're talking to businesses downtown, and they're saying, well, we can't fill up our buildings. We have excess vacancy in our buildings because we don't have enough spot to park more cars. And so all our trends show that we need to add more parking because people that live a distance need to come in. They're not willing to walk 3 blocks to get to their office building. So we need more parking in certain locations, even though downtown as a whole has excess parking. And so we continue to value our travel habits around moving vehicles and parking vehicles and building infrastructure for vehicles, as opposed to thinking about how we're moving ourselves into the future. What are our trips going to look like into the future? How are we getting more short trips, walking, biking, access to public transit? One of the reasons our public transit is so abysmal is because how do you get to some of our transit locations? One of the conversations that we've consistently had with the Department of Transportation is, the Humboldt station on the light rail line is one of the most underutilized light rail stations because it's so difficult as a pedestrian to actually get to it. And so what type of transportation system, how do we want to move people around a city in the future? And I think when we start deciding that for ourselves, we can invest in how we want to build ourselves into the future, as opposed to saying, this is the way our trends have been for the last several decades, so we need to continue to make that same mistake.
Just to build on that, what the Department of Transportation will probably respond is that we don't have time or the budget to plan everything. And in West Palm Beach, we didn't have that. In a lot of the cities, we never had that. But if you have a vision, then that's your litmus test. So what you're doing, if it conforms to the vision, it will conform to a bigger plan once it's done. So that's how you can kind of shortcut past that brush off. It's interesting that cars were invented, 1903, 1905 or something. It's been around just over 100 years. How long have we been walking as a species? Probably longer than that. And then cycling has been, 200 years or so old? Transit's about the same. And transit, walking, and cycling are alternative. They're fundamental. Right. The car is the newbie on the block. How did it become the normal? And so if we're going to succeed on this, we need to change the paradigm and the way of thinking.
We got a question in the third row here, yeah?
Yeah, thank you. This is on.
Again, start with your name, please. For
Bill
the
Walker,
record.
and
Thanks.
I live about a half a mile from here, so I can walk here, which is one of the advantages of living in the city and having places you can walk to, is you can walk to them and bike to them. But my question is, so we have 6 days before supposedly comments are in to try to put a halt to this huge momentum that's built up. Some of us, I think, have had the vision and been speaking for years, but couldn't argue why that vision would work against what the traffic people were saying was, well, but what are we going to do with all these cars that are now backing up and having to slow down? But so we have 6 days to do that, and I'm wondering if it seems like that your presentation should be heard by the DOT people, should be heard by the people in City Hall, and people that can really, that need to say, let's put a stop to this, the people we've been trying to address over years now. Have you been asked or paid or whatever to talk to the DOT people so that they can hear this rationale? You've given us the rationale, in a sense, the understanding, but we don't have, we're not the decision makers. So how can we get you and your ways of thinking to the decision makers?
Well, fortunately, we have our $500,000 budget to work on this project.
Yep.
No, actually, we're getting a stipend for this effort, and our firm is actually subsidizing most of my time here. But my time ends tonight with the project today, but I know you have 6 days, so I made a list at the end of my presentation of the things that you want to get on the record. That's what you need to do right now, is get just stuff on the record while you can. Anything that's important to you. I made a whole list of those those ideas. Get those on the record, because then later on, the DOT will either have to address them or they're open to having an EIS that it had shortfalls in it, so that it would have to be redone. So it's not the end of the process. So that's what you need to do now, is get stuff on the record.
And so we're gonna close at the end of this conversation with calls to action. The Conservancy is gonna take those specific notes and get those into our comments. We're also sort of facilitating a way for the public to support our comments and get a volume of comments in easily. So we'll clear up those action items. But then, the idea is that we're making an effort and we're going to, affect our legislators to give us more time to have these more in-depth conversations. But the key is make our presence felt in these next 6 days when we have this voice and this opportunity, and then push for that next level of coming back to the table, as opposed to moving forward with the plan that we've clearly clarified is not our plan. So I don't know, none that are willing to raise their hand.
The gentleman in the sunglasses and the hat?
We've got a question all the way in the back.
Brian, just to wrap,
sure.
to that point, I think it should be clear. I mean, in New York State, there's efforts being done for highway removals, infrastructure changes, significant ones. I-81 in Syracuse is a highway removal that is New York State DOT approved. I mean, that is their preferred plan. We have the Niagara Falls, the Robert Moses, that's a New York State DOT project. We have the Sheridan Expressway in the Bronx removal, that's a New York State DOT. So I think Ian was saying earlier, our purpose and need statements is where we fail in the beginning. I mean, the purpose and need statement says you need a level of service that sets the bar, so we have to keep the same level of service. So with that, our engineers and the DOT are designing to that. So I think the capabilities and knowledge is there. I mean, the DOT knows what can be done, but they need to change their scope. They need the parameters need to be revised. And the only way, as Ian said, the only way the parameters get revised is if they're told they're revised, and that's your elected officials.
Right in the back, please state your name, please.
I'm Franklin Lavoie, and I live on the west side, and I loved your presentation. It's absolutely clear that restoring the park as Olmsted designed it would be a really great idea. But how do we come up against the gentrification and the speed and the sense that, we've heard you and you've had your little democracy fancy, get together, we've heard your voices, but gee, this is just what we've got to do. How do we come up against it? Because this is bulldozing over things right now in Buffalo. There's money, there's excitement, and the big money and the gentrification, which is from what corner of the world, God knows where. But how do the real people who are here have our voices heard so that we can stop that big money that is going to do what it wants to do despite what the people want?
Brian? My name is Lou Haremsky. I'm the president of the Grand Amherst Business Association. Ours is the only business group that is directly affected by this expressway. So that's why I'm here. But in answer to that question, Matt Driscoll was the most recent commissioner of the DOT, and when this plan was rolled out 6 months ago, he said, "This is it, folks, take it or leave it. If you don't want this, we won't do anything. You want to be heard? Tell them, okay, That's fine. Don't do it. Let's take the time to do this right. What I find very distressing about this whole process is that 3 weeks ago, Buffalo Common Council voted a resolution pretty much panning the DOT's plan and telling them to go back to the drawing boards. Who heard of that? Yeah, we got a couple dozen people. Where was the Buffalo News in reporting that? Did anybody see anything in print? There wasn't any. And it took an awful lot of searching to find it even online. Because they took a position, because they got a one-on-one sit-down with the DOT, which sold them this project, and they came and just said it was wonderful, and we really ought to buy into it. Our newspaper has let us down by having no investigative interest in it. Everything that's been driven here has been driven in part by the people on this stage, largely driven by the Olmsted Conservancy because they're the most directly affected by this, but also because they represent the people. There is an incredible number of people in this county that use that park and want it preserved. So what I would say is, between now and the 18th, get your feelings known. Hammer the news. Let them know that you're disappointed in their position. Write those letters. Every week they total up what were the most demanding topics that they confronted. Make yours part of it. Write to the DOT. Be part of that December 18th deadline. There's a change.org petition. It's got about 5,700 signatures. Add your name to that. I'm not saying that we're going to stop the DOT. I think it would be kind of nice that we'd be able to do that and go back to the drawing boards and bring in Mr. Lockwood's firm to really be a design consultant to initiate those types of ideas. I mean, what Olmsted has done is good, but what he also says is let's connect to the 190 and the 33 and do this all the way. You know, this is pretty much, hate to use the term half-assed project, but it's really what it is because it doesn't deal with the entire thing.
We did get a great editorial in from the ROCC and the Buffalo News today, so hopefully everyone had a chance to read that. 400 spot-on words from the ROCC, so we really want to thank them for that. We did fall a little bit behind schedule, and I hope people are willing to stay a few minutes longer because the conversation's going great. I would like to open up if anyone on stage wants to make any specific notes, and then we'll go back for a few more questions out in the crowd.
Good evening. Is this on? Okay. Good evening, everyone. I'm Sydney Brown. I'm one of the board members with ROC, which is Restore Our Community Coalition. And also in response to the gentleman's question as far as how can we all get involved, one of the things that we've been taught in society and we need to change the paradigm is not to talk politics or religion. I don't know how many of you have taken time to share with your family, your coworkers, and other people in your community your passion for wanting to make changes in the community. Many of you have Facebook pages or Twitter accounts. It's up to us also to let our voices be heard by communicating through our modes of communication with our family members and peers. But even people as you're in the supermarket and you strike up conversations about other things or hurricanes, we need to talk about the things that are directly affecting us in our own community. And I'll say as a panel up here, we have a vision of it's one road. I'll say the Scajaquada Corridor started out, I'll say this party, so to speak, with dealing with the Scajaquada, but we at ROC were formed to deal with the Humboldt Parkway because the vision is to reconnect Delaware Park with MLK Park. One of our stalls, we are now in the environmental impact study and we're dealing with our purpose and need statement, and we've been kind of halted with that because of this very statement of not wanting to maintain the level of traffic. And I want to appreciate and thank Ian for your presentation today because it's even opened up my mindset and understanding just a greater vision of how we can be more effective in a coalition to understand that there's one road and we need to reconnect the city as a whole because the Scajaquada and the 33, which goes all the way to downtown, and all of the other major arteries of Fillmore and Jefferson and Genesee and Broadways have all been affected because of what the 33 has done. So your voices can be heard by speaking them and sharing that news with others and getting other people involved as well.
Great.
Hello, I'm Joel Bernowski with Buffalo Niagara Waterkeeper. So we're very interested in this project, obviously from a water quality standpoint and a public access to water standpoint. I think that there are a lot of parallels between removing a highway in a city and doing things like creek restoration and river restoration. For everybody in this room, you're probably familiar with the Buffalo River, a 25-long-year process to restore the Buffalo River from an industrial site, a lot of impairments in the water. Now we're cleaning it up. We're attracting businesses there. We have Tesla and Solar City moving in. We have Riverworks and Canal Side right at the mouth of Buffalo River. Through this process, we have the opportunity to do for Scajaquada Creek that we've done for the Buffalo River. So this is the point of the night where I assign everybody in this room homework. Go and look at the DOT documents. There's not a lot of mention that there's a creek next to and under this road. So for a plan that talks about redeveloping a road that doesn't support creek restoration is fundamentally incomplete. Because when you talk about creek restoration, you're also talking about economic drivers, connecting neighborhoods together, quality of life issues, air quality. For anybody that has volunteered with Waterkeeper in the past, you know that we do a lot of shoreline sweeps. I see some people here that have actually been on our Scajaquada Creek sites, and one of the major things we pull out of that creek are car parts. A lot of high velocity, high impact car parts. I think the last cleanup we had on Scajaquada, we took about, it was 9 or 10 tons of car parts. So mix that with the plastic bags and the needles you can pull out of the creek, those don't weigh a lot. Like we're talking thousands and thousands of pounds of detritus directly from a road because it's a high-speed road going over a creek. And this isn't even getting into the habitat impairments that are associated with things like stormwater runoff and the pulverized rubber from tires on the road. So as you're formulating your thoughts and your letters in your mind, also think about the environmental impacts and not just the community impacts, although they're intrinsically linked. So I just kind of wanted to put that thought into everybody's mind, and I'm done.
So I want to add another piece of action, and that is, I think, something that Ian said that I've seen happen across New York State. Whoever controls the process controls the outcome. The one city in New York State that has been successful in removing expressway has been the city of Rochester, because the city of Rochester took control of the process. The Interloop Expressway is a state highway, as is the Scajaquada, but the city has a plan in place to remove the Interloop and is systematically doing it. They did the easiest part first, the part that didn't have the traffic volume to continue to justify its existence, so DOT didn't put up too much of a fuss, but now they're going into the harder parts. They're going to have the same fight that the rest of us had. So with that, I not only will ask that you all reach out to the Department of Transportation and make sure you're engaged in terms of that process and on record, but I think it's also important that you all reach out to your council members and to the mayor and make sure that your displeasure with the process, the lack of a process, is on record with them. Anyone that lives in the Delaware district was the one council member who voted against the resolution. I think it's very important that you reach out to your Delaware District Council member and let them know your displeasure about him voting against the resolution, to tell DOT to go back and engage the community in a process that takes their vision into account. These are all important pieces to make sure that we're not just addressing New York State Department of Transportation, but we're addressing all our elected officials here in Buffalo and making sure that our vision for our community is front and center.
We'll go to Dan here, and I guess Tony, and unless there's any other burning questions, we are over time, but I do want to let everyone talk if they can. Go, Dan.
Yes, I'm Daniel Sack. Thank you very much for this presentation. Mr. Lockwood, excellent presentation. Thank you. I'm not going to be shy. I'm going to challenge each of you, as I've been challenged, to read the DEIS, and I've downloaded and I've looked at a great deal of it. But Mr. Lockwood's design, his plan, remove the 33, remove the 198, remove the 190, is exactly what we need. And I want to challenge the representatives of the organizations up here and Olmsted Conservancy to accept that as the plan going forward. Remove those 3 highways from the city. And I want to know, if you can now, from each of you, if you will accept that, or you will discuss it seriously with your membership and boards to make that a plan? Thank you.
I have the microphone, so I'll start. Living in the West Village on Prospect Avenue, I hear the hum of the 190 on a good day. Sometimes it sounds like it's my living room because of the way the wind blows. So I accept your challenge and will continue this effort as long as I am still breathing.
Good evening. I represent the Hamlin Park and Cold Spring area, which deals with Agassiz Circle and also the 33 going downtown. I say we have had that conversation, and it's not out of our vision or our mindset with connecting MLK to Delaware Park. I accept that personally. I will talk about it with other board members, and I'll say as Sean Ryan is here and he can speak for himself, and us having conversations with him, and I appreciate his presence and his championship. He has a vision of having one road, but things are done in phases. And I'll say for Rock, we had restoration of a covering from Best to Ferry Street with a covering, with that just being an initial phase. But I definitely accept the challenge and will entertain that with our board.
So sitting on the Parkside board, personally, I 100% accept that challenge, and we will bring it to the board and have talked about it. The challenges we've had is that it's hard to get to the larger conversation when we haven't been able to even get everyone to accept the smaller one. So I think we're at a point now with the visioning that this should be part of the conversation, and I definitely will be talking about it with our committee and our board.
So lucky for me, Waterkeeper has been saying the same thing for about 25 years now. Ian had sketched the removal of the 3 highways on the back of a piece of paper. We actually have that in GIS mapped if you would like that. The one caveat I will add to this, though, is this isn't Waterkeeper's plan or Olmsted's plan. This is the community's plan. This is the plan that we're putting forward as the citizens of Buffalo. This is what's right for our city, what's right for our community, and what is right for the road.
I'll accept the challenge. I think it's a great discussion starting point. But I also want to fill in a little bit of a void. As Ian went through the presentation, he was able to point to all these wonderful developments that have sprung up where highways have been removed, and you've probably been sitting there and wondering just how would we do that with the Scajaquada? Most of it's in a park. The Black Rock Riverside Alliance did a grant proposal last year which envisioned the removal of the section of the 198 simply between Grant Street and the 190. And what it did was to open up about 92 acres for development, which most people, don't even know exists. I mentioned, because Joel talked about the detritus that ends up in the creek and how much Waterkeeper would like to revive that creek. And what we had discovered was that all those properties that sit very vacant looking on Tonawanda Street have a back lot line of the creek. And what's happened along the Buffalo River, where it's become a congested waterway in the summer, could very easily happen in our neighborhood if development were allowed to occur because it wasn't in the shadow of the expressway. So there is a vision. It's a vision which applies to our neighborhood. And I'd invite you to go to our Alliance website to take a look at what was proposed. Very illuminating. So just to fill in fact, some of the photos that Ian had as part of his presentation came from that study. So thanks.
And on behalf of the Conservancy, again, I'm not the decision maker at the Conservancy, but in terms of a larger vision and the community's vision, echoing everyone's ideas up here, I think it's where we'll arrive that right-sizing all of our infrastructure within the city is the right thing for all of our organizations. We'll go to Art, and then Tony, and then if we could please close out.
Art Giacalone, one very quick comment. Given the place we are at, the 11th hour nature of this project, there's only one political figure in the state that can do something about it, and that's the governor. Forget the Common Council. No matter how good intentioned our state legislatures are, they do not have the power to say to the DOT, this is not in the long-term interest of the city of Buffalo and the residents of the state of New York. And so the pressure has to be, you need to be having substantive comments to the EIS the next few days, but you need to be directing your political effort toward the governor. That's the only person who can make a difference at this point. Thank you.
All right. Tony? Oh yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to mention that you know, it takes people like that. There's these people, like we call them the veto people, who have the power to change things, and yeah, you got to reach them. I just wanted to mention the money, though, because the gentleman at the back mentioned something about money, and one of the things the governor is interested in is, and a lot of politicians are bringing the bacon home. Like, they want to spend money, do projects here to help the economy, and you can spend money on a different version of the highway, or you can spend money on restoring the park and building a parkway. You can invest money into affordable housing. You can invest money into all sorts of things. Now, can you imagine, though, if you still had 575,000 people living here, the ratio of taxpayer per unit of infrastructure would be more than double. And so some communities wonders why they don't have the money to buy nice things now, because they don't have enough people to share the cost. And a lot of the people have left, so you've got less money to work with. But if you change your infrastructure to actually attract people, you can actually have more money for things. And when we were working in Houston in the energy corridor, they were wondering why they can't attract people to live in the area. And we said it has to do with your bad quality of life to your streets and stuff. And they said, well, we don't want to spend money on trails and parks and connections and these sorts of things. We want real transportation solutions. And because we don't want our taxes to go up. And so I thought, really? And I asked them, do you know how much, you know the country has a GDP? Well, cities have like a little GDP, which they call city wealth. How much do you spend on transportation all in, on your roads, your gas, your cars, and all that? And I'm going to get the numbers wrong, but it's something like 14% in Houston of all the wealth is spent on transportation. Now, let's go to one of those cities that's a little more left-leaning and buys nice things like trails and stuff, like New York. How much do they spend? And he thought it had to be more because all that extra stuff, right? Well, it's about 10%. So with the transit and so forth, it's actually cheaper. You know, exporting people out to the suburbs and running utilities and all this sort of thing creates a very expensive system. So I said, let's go even further left to Toronto, which has layers of different types of transit and so forth. How much do they spend of their city wealth on all in getting around? It's about 7%. And then go totally socialistic to Copenhagen or someplace like that. How much do they spend? And they've got little roads for bikes with special signals and all these sorts of things. It's about 4%. So accommodating walkers and cycling and mixes of uses in close proximity is really quite inexpensive compared to long-distance highway car-based travel. Houston had chosen the most expensive way for people to get around. And they say it's because I can't afford to live in the city, I have to live way out there. Think about what you could do if you had 7% of your city wealth available for something else besides highway infrastructure. You know, that's a lot of money, plus double your population. So we could talk about the money a lot longer, but there's a snippet of what a sustainable vision might look like. And I think the money side works to the environmental side and everything else.